So let me now move on to our second keynote speaker, which is Tanveer Khan. Tanveer is the Vice President and Global Head of Business Process Services for Dell. Like Chris, Tanveer is also a 25-year veteran in the ITO and BPO domain. His expertise is in driving process transformation, combining automation, process optimization, and analytics. Prior to joining Dell, Tanveer led global strategy and sales at Wipro BPO. Over the years, Tanveer has consistently delivered growth by providing leading-edge service offerings and thought leadership in the BPO domain. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Tanveer.
It's great to be here. I've been here earlier. I saw some of you here last year, and it's good to reconnect. People who are here for the first time, welcome. I've been talking to a lot of my peers in the industry about what's happening in BPO automation. And my feeling right now is that the rumors of the demise of BPO are greatly exaggerated. The future of BPO is automation. That's what everybody tells me. And sincerely, I believe it. But I started doing a little poll amongst all my colleagues in different industries, and I asked them a simple question. How much of the work you do is currently automated? Consistently, the answer was somewhere in the 30 to 50%. So my conclusion was, in the last couple of years, if everybody's taken, say, 50% of their work on the higher end and automated it, we are all public companies. Our profit should have doubled, or our prices should have halved, or all our employees would have got twice as much salary. None of that has happened. So where are those gains of automation going? So my view right now is, even though the future of BPO is automation, the hype has got a little ahead of reality. So I wanted to spend a little time talking about the automation myth. I wanted to talk a little bit about different flavors of automation. I wanted to spend a few minutes on how automation is really working in our environment at Dell. I wanted to spend a few minutes on what it does to the other parts of the organization. And if you do a good automation program, what do you do with that money that you save? So with that, let me just get a little bit into what are the different type of automations that we've really been seeing. So let me make sure I get this clicker right. Can anybody help me move to the next slide? Oh, now it's moved too fast. Okay. So if you look at the BPO industry, there are a lot of processes traditionally which were always processes that were supposed to be done by systems. Trade reconciliation. A system matches two trades, approves them, they go through. Trades that fail are manually held by people. So people in BPO were really doing exception processing. Now, over the years, those systems have improved. You've come up with better business rules. For example, in trade reconciliation, a trade failed because something as simple as a branch office address was missing from the record. Somebody went into the master data management, put that address in, and now your automation rate has gone up by 3%. Now that truly is not automation, that is error reduction. So today when you look at people saying, in the case of Dell, we do a lot of healthcare claims. In a lot of instances, we took auto adjudication rates from 70% to 90%. So have we gone and automated 2/3 of the work? Yes, you can make that claim. But really what you've done is, it is a transaction that was supposed to be done by the system. There were errors in the system. Those errors were calling for manual adjudication. You've removed those errors. So we need to clearly recognize straight through processing as something that drives automation, but that is not true automation. Let's look at the second part, which is workflow automation. Now, traditionally in BPO, a set of systems or people do a certain tasks. Those tasks have to be handed over between people and systems. Every time you did a handoff, there was an overhead. Because you were introducing a handoff, there were errors involved, and somebody had to keep a track of it. So there were handoffs, there were controls, and there were reporting. So some smart people 10, 15, 20 years ago came up with workflow systems that would remove the manual aspect of handoffs, controls, and reporting. And that was really what workflow automation was all about. But that was removing overheads that we ourselves had created. That wasn't really automation. That was, we introduced an overhead, then we removed that overhead. We love to call it automation. That is not automation. Let's get to the third category, which are manual labor-intensive tasks. And this is what today's robotic automation is all about. It is in this area, when we narrow it down, people are talking of automation rates which are in low single digits, beginning to get into double digits. And this is what robotic automation is all about. Now, in my previous job, I also used to wear the hat of a CTO and strategy. And I thought I had a fairly decent understanding of what is now being referred to as neural cognitive constructs that understand the environment they operate in and learn, which is driving robotic automation. Think Google DeepMind, think IBM Watson, think IPsoft's Amelia. So over the last 1 year, I've done a lot of research on that, and now I'm convinced that I understand nothing about them. So let's get down to how do you take a manual process and attack it. So that's something that we've been doing. So I wanted to share a little bit of my experience in that. But before that, I was told that you can't go to a conference and speak till you have a bar chart. So this is sort of the checkbox which talks about trends in automation. But this would call for a half-an-hour conversation, so I'm going to skip the trends and go straight into the second area of automation. So once we started working on automation, I'll give you an example of how it works. But the concept was, how do you measure automation in a company? So we came up with a fairly simple concept. The idea was that you are doing a certain transaction. Let's say you are doing coding of claims, and you've got a team of 35 people, and this team of 35 people, let's say, generates $35,000 of revenue. This is the view from the provider side, $35,000 of revenue in a week. So have your finance people come in, do an audit, let them sign off that these 35 people are doing work worth $35,000. Configure your automation tools, deploy these automation tools, let them run for 6 months. After 6 months, come back and do an audit again. If the same team is doing $35,000 of work with 30 FTEs, the way we measure it, now we say that this team has got 30 FTEs and 5 AFTEs. A AFTE is an automation full-time equivalent which does the same amount of measurable work as a full-time equivalent, as an FTE. So the way we set it out is that every operating team was given a AFTE target, which is how many AFTEs do you need to deploy as part of automation. So let's look at how the whole process works. So let me give you an example of a process. So we do a lot of medical coding work. What is medical coding? You go see a doctor. After you see the doctor, a doctor writes a bunch of pieces of paper, and that's sent to somebody to basically file a claim with the insurance company for reimbursement. Now, in that claim, there's a bunch of papers which have a lot of information about you, your height, weight, insurance policy, blood group, temperature, etc., etc. Somewhere hidden in there is the reason why you went to see a doctor. From that, somebody has to actually extract, why did you go to see a doctor and what did the doctor do? So only two relevant pieces of information are, why did you go to see a doctor and what did the doctor do? So we use a lot of technologies, language, natural language processing, etc., to extract that information. We worked on it for a year, failed miserably. Now, for example, there is a technical term in the healthcare world which is called shortness of breath. The code for shortness of breath is 786.5 ICD-9 code. But get what? You don't go to a doctor and say, I have shortness of breath. You might have gone and said, I was climbing stairs. When I climb stairs, I start panting. Now, no amount of NLP is going to convert I start panting when I climb stairs into shortness of breath. So we realized that if you take a process can be broken up into process atoms. And some process atoms can be automated. Some are better left with humans. So let me describe this process to you. So somebody is going to extract, you went to see a doctor because you have shortness of breath. The doctor prescribed an asthma pump. So that was the treatment that the doctor provided. This document comes in. So somebody takes that and creates a treatment code. So diagnostic code was shortness of breath. There's a treatment code. These codes are put into a system. There's a matching to do to make sure that the treatment given to you was valid for your symptoms. For example, you went for shortness of breath, and the doctor did an X-ray of your foot. That is not the right treatment, so it cannot be approved for reimbursement. But if it does match, it goes to a second stage where you apply business rules to determine for that type of treatment, how much is the payment that should be made to you. It goes into a claim system. The claim system is submitted. Somebody does a QA. Now, that's a traditional manual way of doing it, typically 480 seconds process. So when we started looking at automation of this process, the first thing we did was we looked at the first step, which was, why did you go to see the doctor and what did the doctor do? No NLP could handle that. We called it pre-packaging. A human being is going to eyeball that with a yellow highlighter, highlight what was the reason you went to see the doctor and annotate it. With a blue highlighter, they'll highlight what did the doctor do. From here on, automation takes over. So the automation now picks up shortness of breath. There's a web service that's available from the ICD-9, ICD-10 book publishers. You can consume the web service to convert that description into ICD-9 code, which can be populated into the system. Once it goes to the system, a rules engine matches the diagnostic code with the treatment code. If there's a match, it goes through. If it's a mismatch, throw it back to the human queue. If it goes through that, now you've got a second rules engine which says shortness of breath, simple prescription, $70, generate a claim, push it out. We were able to take a 480-second process and compress it down to 45 seconds. So now this is an example of robotic automation as it exists today. Now IPsoft, Blue Prism are coming up with technologies, hopefully in the near future, which would be able to take complex processes and bring more and more automation in that. So that was, a good learning. Once we started automating, we realized that there were other parts of the organization that started breaking. So let's take the world of claims. In the health claims world, what we found was, in common sense, the easy claims were getting automated. You went to see a doctor, got a flu shot, bingo, automated. Somebody had a heart attack, there's no way it's going to get automated. But now with automation, the claims that were falling out were so complex that we could not find people in low-cost labor markets to deal with that. India, Argentina, Philippines. We needed people who'd been working for years and years in the industry. So as our automation rates are going up, our dependence on people in the US is beginning to go up again. So our fundamental shoring model got into question when we started looking at specialization. And every other department got into a mix. You've heard I don't know how many of you read Who Moved My Cheese, where you've got, two men and mice in a maze looking for cheese, and finally two of them find the cheese and become so dependent on it. And when you move the cheese, they are lost. And we started seeing the same thing. So we looked at recruitment. What was our BPO recruitment doing? They were looking for people with typing speed, accuracy. Suddenly, that was not relevant. We were trying to look at people who could understand the end-to-end process with analytical skills. Our recruiters were not trained to look for skills like that. When we looked at training, people were trained to follow a repetitive process without an error, get to a certain productivity rate, and hit production. Guess what? That was no longer the ask of training. Training now needed to train people to deal with ambiguity, because you've got 20 steps in a process, somebody else is doing 7. We had to look at scheduling. Now we had an opportunity to use people working in the day shift in India, piling up work for automation, and let automation work at night. So scheduling changed. So what we realized was the way we do quality assurance, fundamentally different when you get into automation rates which are in 30, 40, 50%. The way you do recruitment training. So if you really get into automation, the team that produces the automation suite and the tools and the production team that start deploying it is actually a very small part of the puzzle. The larger part of the puzzle is your ecosystem gearing up to do that? If not, then your automation starts slowing down very, very considerably. So right now we are at a stage where automation is at a very early stage, and it's the surround systems, networking, finance. How does your finance team build in automation into your pricing? How do you deliver better value to your customers? How do you rewrite SLAs in light of automation? So those are the surround things that need to get changed. So those are the things that are our real learnings that we need to start adapting to. Next came the decision, do we go and buy a Blue Prism, an IPsoft, invest in a Watson, an Emilia, or do we start working on that ourselves? So this was a classic build versus buy decision. Now, I'm a firm believer that there are great off-the-shelf tools that you have to use. If there is something that exists out there, don't reinvent the wheel. But when we started looking at things about last year, what we found was a lot of these things were not really conducive to work in a third-party environment. There are tools out there that give you excellent results if you go and integrate them into your core systems. Guess what? The BPO world operates in the world of Citrix. Now, the moment you get into Citrix, you get into thin clients, you get into screen scraping, a lot of off-the-shelf tools that are available today do not lend themselves to the world of outsourcing. They lend themselves today the world of transaction processing. So when we started looking at it, we realized that the investments in the tools, the sort of licensing that is needed, and where the tools were in the life cycle last year were not where they needed to be. So in our case, we went into a buy decision. A build decision. I'm sure a lot of you would have gone through that. Some people have a build, some people have a buy. But I'm quite confident that going forward, we would have a mix of third-party tools and our own tools. But if you don't have a good workflow, workbench platform, you will not be able to extract value from the third-party tools available. So if automation is on the cards for you, your investment today has to be in a very robust workflow platform, which will be able to integrate the components or the process atoms that need to be tied together. I think we are still a few years away from taking a process and automating it. Where we are today is taking a process, breaking into process atoms, and working in a man-machine combination. And that is really what's going to drive automation. You can't do that if your underlying workflow engine is not strong. So if automation is on your cards, your investment today has to be workflow. This is the classic build versus buy, the benefits. So in our case, we chose the direction to go towards buy. Build. So we built our solutions. Right now, we are working with a few companies. We'll do that. But the next question is, automation is going to give you savings. No questions about it. It will range from 10% to 40%, somewhere in that range. The question is, what do you want to do with that money? Easiest thing is put it back in your pocket. But in our case, we took a slightly different approach. And let me give you an example. So I will sort of wrap up this conversation about a story from our insurance business. So we are one of the US largest third-party insurance organizations. We do TPA work, we do end-to-end administration of policies. One of those functions is unclaimed property in life insurance. So if somebody dies and doesn't claim their property, which is the policy amount, it goes into this unclaimed policy queue. So typically we get a premium from a customer, and that's how we know the person is alive. When the premium stops coming, either the person is dead or the policy is dead. But when the premium stops coming, you have to make a determination if this person has died, because once they die, they forget to tell us they're dying. So we have to do something with that amount. So we had, Joe Smezinski as a policyholder. It's a made-up name to protect somebody's identity. But, Joe Smezinski had been a long-time policyholder. One day, Joe Smezinski's payment stopped coming. So the case was assigned to one of our unclaimed property agents, Charlene Wilcox. And, we have some routine death checks. So we check with Social Security Administration. We do obituary search. And indeed, she did obituary search and find out that Mr. Joe Smezinski, unfortunately, had died. On his policies were name of two people. So as per process, you send a letter to their house saying, you've got a life insurance policy, please contact us, etc. If the letter comes back, you send it again and again. No response the third time, money goes into unclaimed property. Now that's where the process typically ends. But in this case, Charlene didn't give up. So when we got the third letter back, she started digging out and dug up the obituary and find out what city it was in. So it was in a small town in Nebraska. So Charlene picked up the phone and called up all the funeral homes in that town. There were just 3 funeral homes at a small town, and said, did you conduct the funeral of Joe Smezinski about 7 months ago? And one of the funeral directors said, yes. He said, I'm calling from Dell. He had a life insurance policy, and I'm looking for his beneficiaries, and it is these 2 people. Do you know who they are? He said, yes, those were his parents. They died about 5 or 6 years ago. So the parents were dead. She said, who did the funeral? He said, that was his sister. He said, can you give me the sister's number? He said, I can't, but I can pass on the message to the sister. So, Charlene explained to him what was going on. Sure enough, next day the phone rang. Turned out his sister was a single mother, woman of rather limited means. She was struggling day to day. 7 months ago, she had gone into considerable debt to do her brother's funeral. That policy changed her life. So my message to you is, use automation as a game changer in BPO. You will save a lot of money. Invest that in the soul of your business. So that's all I had. If you have any questions, we'll do that. Otherwise, I'm standing between you and the bar.